Distinguished delegates, I now call to order the second meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the 14th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. As the first order of business this morning, I invite the committee to turn its attention to the appointment of facilitators of its contact groups. It is my understanding that Mr. Troy Torrington of Guyana has been proposed as facilitator of Contact Group 2 on other matters. May I take it that the committee wishes to appoint Mr. Torrington as the facilitator of the contact group? I hear no objection. It is so decided. I urge all parties and regional groups to review their efforts to identify the facilitator of Contact Group 1 in a timely manner in order to facilitate the conclusions of the work of the committee on schedule. Distinguished delegates, I now invite the committee to begin its consideration of Agenda Item 3, entitled Effective Implementation of the Convention at National, Sub-Regional, and Regional Levels. Sub-Item C, Follow-up on Policy Frameworks and Thematic Issues. Delegations will recall that this sub-item includes the consideration of the following issues: drought, sand and dust storms, gender, migration, and new and emerging issues. Land tenure. The committee will now proceed to review each of these issues one by one, beginning with drought. I now invite the committee to turn its attention to the issue of drought. Under this issue, the committee has before it the following documents: ICCD/COP14/16, ICCD/COP14INF.3. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat, Mr. Daniel Tiziki, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. By its decision 29 COP13, the Conference of Parties requested the Secretariat to report on the implementation of the Drought Initiative and the various decisions relating to the policy advocacy framework on drought, and to follow up at its 14th session. This document reviews progress made towards meeting the requests made by the COP in decision 29/COP13, presenting a summary of the results achieved within the framework of the Drought Initiative and the other drought-related activities of the UNCCD Secretariat and the Global Mechanism. This document also proposed a plan of action for the next steps in addressing drought under the UNCCD based on the lessons learned during the current biennium. The document also incorporates the actions taken with reference to a decision on assessment of the need for any additional arrangements regarding drought under the UNCCD. It concludes with recommendations for action for consideration by parties at the 14th session of the COP14. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat for his statement. Are there any delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the reports that were just introduced? I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to make a statement on behalf of the parties of Annex 5 region. We welcome the further development of the drought initiative. This initiative should attract more countries and should not be limited only to supporting countries in preparing scientifically based drought action plans, build a national capacity in setting up the proactive drought mitigation mechanism, and facilitating experience and good practices exchange among the countries' drought initiative is important. And also we would like to note the important role of SPI in work undertaken during the last 2 years in relation to drought indicators and land-based interventions to mitigate drought. The parties of Annex 5 region enhance regional and sub-regional cooperation in the field of drought management using the platforms of existing DLDD scientific and technical centers and institutions. We call the parties to consult the establishment of intergovernmental working group to propose the most optimal mixture of activities for complementary arrangement on drought. And we urge parties of the convention on immediate actions to address drought effects. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Belarus, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to all of you. India appreciate the document which proposes a plan for action for next step in addressing drought under the UNCCD. This document is very technical, very important document which provide the parties to support the adoption and implementation of land-based interventions for drought management, mitigation, drought, early warning system, risk and vulnerability assessment, and enhanced drought risk mitigation measure. This document is also provides the guidance for gender mainstreaming in drought national plan and preparedness program. Further, drought is included as a new strategy objective in the UNCCD 2018 to 2030 strategic framework to be implemented through national action programs. This document also provides a technical guidelines to assist the parties in implementation of drought resilience, adaptation and management policy framework, and provide review of various methods in drought vulnerability assessment, technical approaches, and financial and legal instrument addressing drought. Mr. Chairman, India being a drought affected country agreed to promote capacity development for national drought preparedness, planning, drought early warning, risk and vulnerability assessment, and enhanced drought risk mitigation measure. Mr. Chair, India appreciates the introduction of drought as a new strategic objective in the UNCCD 2018 to 2030 strategic framework to be implemented through its national action program. India also appreciates the decision of COP14 held in decision number 29, which also talk about the drought resilience adaptation and management policy framework, DREAMP framework. DREAMP is also very important tool for integrated multi-pronged approach based on 6 cross-cutting goals, identifying pragmatic action for countries to better prepare and respond to drought and guide the design and implementation of drought policy at national to sub-national level. Central to this proactive approach to increasing resilience to drought is better management of land and water resources, thus keeping in view the frequent droughts in recent past years in countries' mission to achieve land degradation neutral condition by 2030 through its sustainable resource management practices. Implementation of DREAMP is essential and appropriate for India. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from India, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. to reverse the aggravating trends of land degradation, including desertification, droughts, and deforestation at both national and global scale. We believe that it is necessary first and foremost to raise the public awareness on land degradation and to develop human resources to cope with it. Mr. Chairperson, droughts and land degradation are one of major environmental concerns in DPRK. In DPRK, the mountainous areas are covering approximately 80% of total country territory, and since mid-1990s, the repeated natural disasters like floods and droughts, as well as economic stagnancy, has brought about devastation of large areas of forest lands, including uncontrolled conversion activities in sloping forest lands. In this regard, the government of the DPRK took a series of measures on a national scale to restore degraded forest and agricultural lands and to improve ecosystem services and productivity, including the improvement of drought management, so as to join the global efforts to combat land degradation. In particular, the Supreme Leader Comrade Kim Jong-un, Chairman of the National Affairs Commission of the DPRK, has declared a war on deforestation to put forward a massive project to turn all the mountains of the country into ones of gold thickly wooded with trees. Accordingly, National Master Plan for Forest Reforestation and National Agroforestry Program have been developed and are under implementation, while relevant policy and institutional frameworks are being enhanced. Once the plans are fully carried out, it will considerably contribute to improving our people's livelihood and to the international efforts to mitigate climate change, prevent natural disasters, and increase agricultural products. In this opportunity, the DPRK would like to reiterate its commitment to the SDG 15 and the Target 15.3 and look forward to close cooperation with UNCCD Secretariat as well as other parties and partners for the effective implementation of the Convention on a global scale. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I'm taking the floor for the first time, I would like to extend the appreciation of my delegation to the government and the people of India for the warm hospitality and reception extended to our delegation since our arrival in this beautiful city, Nodia. Mr. Chair, the African group, I'd like to say that I'm making this statement on behalf of the African group, and I would like to say that the African group notes with appreciation the assistance provided to parties by the Secretariat and the Global Mechanism in relation to the process of developing national drought action plans. I believe that this has been a very key outcome of the drought initiative, and furthermore, we also note that with appreciation that the efforts of the Committee on Science and Technology for their efforts to speed up the process of developing the indicators for monitoring and the monitoring framework that would enable us to effectively implement the strategic objective on drought. I would like to say that the drought initiative has enabled countries in our region to define and prioritize actions in order to apply a systematic approach in addressing drought at national and also sub-regional levels. While this effort is commended, the group observes that the initiative has not yet reached all affected parties that require support in this regard. It is our recommendation that support to national drought plans should follow a similar approach like that like that of the National Action Plan alignment or the LDN target setting, where countries were fully supported. In this regard, we call on GEF as a funding mechanism for the convention to include the development of drought plans as a priority. Mr. Chair, I would like to further note that with appreciation that the work of the Secretariat and its collaborating partners in the development of the drought toolbox, which has been useful in assisting countries to formulate and implement drought action plans. However, I would like to add that the effectiveness of this tool will require a wider engagement by parties, as well as capacity building in the use of the tool, and where possible, incorporate regional expertise to enhance national capacities. Mr. Chair, many national drought action plans have been prepared with an integrated approach, building strong linkages with other Rio conventions and a number of SDGs, particularly those relating to food security, health, water, among others. Implementation of drought action plans will require substantial resources. Most importantly, we need to enhance access to available funding mechanisms, especially the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, and Adaptation Fund, among others. These mechanisms should prioritize and mainstream drought and LDN as a primary thematic area in their financing. We strongly believe that there is need to strengthen the holistic implementation of this convention by having a legally binding instrument, preferably that would ensure that there is adequate issues considered, especially to safeguard life, livelihood, and land in line with the SDGs. Furthermore, drought is one of the important principles of the convention, and this needs more and effective action. In conclusion, Mr. Chair, I would like to say the following. One, all affected parties be supported to prepare their national drought plans. Parties be supported to implement national action plans, national drought plans. Capacity building development should be availed to parties to enable them use the drought toolbox, and also to effectively apply the three-level indicators for the strategic objective. Funding mechanisms such as the GCF, the GEF, and Adaptation Fund should prioritize drought. And I would also like to finally say that we should work towards putting in place a more legally binding drought legal instrument in order to work towards a better management of drought and ensure that the COP14 will initiate a process in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Uganda, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU welcomes the report and congratulates the UNCCD Secretariat and the Global Mechanism for the progress on policy advocacy on drought and on the Drought Initiative, in particular on helping parties develop plans on drought preparedness, support regional advocacy and capacity building, and develop knowledge tools to boost the resilience of people and ecosystem to drought. The EU welcomes proposals for the further development of the drought toolbox, as well as the support to and the enhancement of the capacity of countries participating to the drought initiative, the strengthening of cooperation with other UN agencies, as well as increasing technical and scientific capacity on drought. We would welcome, however, more details on the exact type of support the UNCCD is planning to provide in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, as regards the successive development of global principles or other complementary arrangements for mitigating the effects of drought, the EU wonders what the nature and content of the principles could be, how this would be developed, and what would be the added value of the proposed principles as compared to the existing frameworks and tools. We stand ready to engage with the other parties to discuss this further. The EU would also like to stress, however, the importance to adopt at all levels a holistic, integrated approaches to disaster risk reduction and to strengthening the resilience of the socio-ecological systems to external environmental shocks beyond natural disasters. In this regard, it is crucial to coordinate efforts of multiple actors involved in this area and to avoid duplications, including through global networks such as the Global Network Against Food Crises and regional initiatives. We therefore welcome the enhanced cooperation between UN agencies and other organizations dealing with drought issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we would also like to emphasize the importance of exchanging of information with humanitarian actors in the development and implementation of national drought preparedness plans and the conduct of drought vulnerability assessment to ensure better complementarities and coherence with humanitarian response where needed. The EU would be keen to have more information on the links and complementarities between national drought plans developed under the Drought Initiative, national action plans on desertification adopted under the Convention, national adaptation plans developed in the framework of the Paris Agreement, and national disaster risk reduction policies and plans in line with the integrated approaches of participation and ownership. We encourage parties to enhance their capacity in drought risk management and use the drought toolbox to this end, and are looking forward for a report from the Secretariat on its use and effectiveness and on the status of implementation of national drought policies, eventually at the next meeting of the COP. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the European Union, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Colombia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Colombia would like to thank the Secretariat for drafting the reports. We agree with the report's content as well as the recommendations included for the next steps as part of the drought initiative. The document's approach is in line with the recent discussions we have had about embracing a more proactive and less reactive approach for the implementation of policies to provide comprehensive drought management, which would mean increasing actions of preparation, early warning, assessing vulnerabilities, and the mitigation of the consequences of droughts. We believe that it is important that the Secretariat should continue to develop technical and financial mechanisms to provide support to countries in the implementation of the various policy instruments that were created as part of the drought initiative, or that are being created currently for comprehensive drought management, working with the CSCT and the CRIC. We would like to suggest to the Secretariat that all working documents on this issue should take into account that some countries, such as Colombia, did not develop a national action plan on drought. They developed other types of instruments. In our case, the drought initiative resulted in drafting a policy instrument that includes the various action plans related to comprehensive drought management. We drafted a proposal for a national policy for comprehensive drought policy, which included On the one hand, the National Action Plan to combat desertification and droughts, with, on the other hand, the National Policy for mitigating natural disasters. Which is why we appreciate the development of such instruments as part of the strategy. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Colombia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Argentina.
Thank you very much, Chair. First and foremost, Argentina would like to highlight the content of this document, which considers the various measures adopted by the Secretariat as well as the global mechanism relating to the application of the Initiative on Drought and other related activities. Argentina is currently receiving support for actions related to the Drought Initiative, and we are currently drafting plans to mitigate the effects of drought and to create early warning systems. Some of these instruments are included in the recommendations of item 2C of the document. Argentina would like to endorse the proposal made by the European Union just moments ago, asking for further detail about upcoming plans from the Secretariat. Furthermore, we would like to express our gratitude for the support we received when building our national capabilities and when trying to scale up our efforts to combat droughts. Which is why we are particularly grateful for the document presented yesterday from the World Meteorological Organization, which spoke about a global alert system. And lastly, the delegation of Argentina would like to appeal to all state parties and to the Secretariat to continue to give this issue due priority, given that it represents one of the 3 pillars of the central mandate of the Convention. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Argentina, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the conclusions of COP13 and the decision on drought as well as the drought initiative, and we would also like to express our thanks regarding the report. We hope that drought be given more importance on all levels, national, regional, and international, and that the activities and initiatives in the future would comprise all geographical regions in a balanced fashion. And we look forward to giving drought more importance by preparing a separate document concerned with addressing all the aspects related to drought, such as monitoring, early warning, preparedness, and addressing all the social, environmental, and economic effects thereof. Moreover, we look forward that Jeff would provide additional resources to countries affected and vulnerable to drought in order to help it address relevant challenges. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Saudi Arabia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the Secretariat for having prepared the report on drought, and we welcome the drought initiative, and we agree that parties should be called upon to cooperate and to take the necessary measures in order to alleviate the harmful effects on droughts, be it in the political, social, economic, and environmental aspects, as well as migration-related issues. And we call upon the mechanism to help establishing observatories in order to apply the technologies of early warning in such countries. A drought is a common denominator, as we said yesterday, between the three Rio conventions, and I would like to draw your attention that Egypt has successful experiences in mitigating the effects of a drought and preserving natural resources and the optimal use of such resources, especially in marginalized and remote areas. And I would like that the efforts of Egypt be added to the international efforts in the field of sustainable development. We agree and we support the vision of the African group presented by the distinguished representative of Uganda, as well as the Arab group represented by the delegate of the representative of the Arab group, as well as the EU. We associate ourselves with all those statements. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Egypt and now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Considering that this is the first time that we take the floor, I would like to extend our thanks on behalf of our delegation, the delegation of the Republic of Tunisia, to extend our thanks to China for having presided over COP13, and we would like to congratulate the Republic of India for having presided over COP14. Represented in His Excellency the Minister of the Environment and Forests, and we seize this opportunity to extend our congratulations to Mr. Ibrahim Tiao, the Executive Secretary, for the trust he has enjoyed by being assigned as head of this convention, and I assure him of our full cooperation and support. Mr. Chairman, during the past period, in implementation of the recommendations of the previous conferences of parties, Tunisia, in cooperation with its partners, has aligned an action plan on the certification for the period 2018 to 2030. And we have taken into account the indicator of the percentage of land deterioration, and we have carried out preliminary studies in order to identify the objective in order to mitigate land degradation up to 2030 in conformity with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Out of this, we strongly support the vision of the African group presented by His Excellency the representative of Uganda, as well as the Arab position put forward by His Excellency the representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we would like that addressing drought be given sufficient importance, especially in light of the expected climate change, which would make the phenomenon of drought even more severe, which would in turn have grave economic and social repercussions. For example, Tunisia is facing a drought once every 3 years on average, which has a direct effect on our balance of trade and the food stock and the production of crops and fruitful trees. Mr. Chairman, we would like to extend our thanks and we call upon the General Mechanism and the Secretariat to further support the Arab countries in preparing relevant strategies on drought and to support international cooperation in order to help countries affected by such a phenomenon which has an immediate effect on people in general. Thank you for your kind attention, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
谢谢主席。
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, the regional drought is becoming an increasingly severe disaster, and China is no exception. Drought is causing even more severe damages to China and our country and regions. In order to address the drought issue, we have already established a very stable and mature early warning system for drought. And this early warning system can cover the real-time monitoring and rolling predictions in the whole area of China. This system has also a disaster evaluation system which can be updated in real time. It can also conduct the impact evaluation of drought. It is our hope that this disaster early warning and evaluation system can be beneficial to achieve the strategic target of UNCCD, which is to mitigate, adapt to, and manage drought impact, and also to strengthen the resilience for vulnerable populations and ecosystems. We also have several suggestions for COP14 document. In COP14 document, it has been mentioned COP11 urged the Secretariat to strengthen promoted work in gender mainstreaming. We note that UNCCD Secretariat has compiled a handbook for gender mainstreaming. And in addition to that, other specific work has not been reflected in relevant document. Therefore, we suggest the UNCCD Secretariat to add relevant work, for example, the role of women in drought management. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of China, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
Shukran. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Iraq appreciates the efforts exerted in preparing this document in order to provide support in fighting droughts nationwide, as well as the early warning systems and the strategic framework thereof. Such a document enjoys the full support of Iraq, and it explains the steps to be taken in order to fight drought. As you know, sir, Iraq is a West Asian country that is severely affected by drought, land degradation, and desertification, which has changed the landscape of our country. And vast areas have been turned from fruitful countries into desert areas due to the drought that has lasted for years. years and has adversely affected our landscape and our water and land management systems. All this has negatively affected our landscape and has deteriorated the quality of our lands, and hence has also adversely affected our food production and food security systems. Hence, sir, notwithstanding such conditions, Iraq has a success story in preparing the National Action Plan on drought by mitigating and adapting to this phenomenon and to benefit from international state-of-the-art developments and using the modern means of irrigation and establishing relevant observatory for the sake of early warning and preparedness. This has been a result of the efforts by the Committee on Science and Technology, and we hope that Iraq receives additional financial and technological assistance in order to benefit from the global monitoring and early warning systems in order to achieve early preparedness and mitigation of disasters, including and especially drought, and to help Iraq in the implementation of its national action plans in a manner that is commensurate with the needs of this period and to apply the modern technology. In this respect, we need to benefit from the financial support mechanisms and to receive the help of relevant international funds, for example, the Green Fund and JEF, in order to fully implement this convention and to benefit from the drought fund and the drought toolbox. We associate ourselves with the position of the African and the Arab groups, as well as what was mentioned in this respect by including all geographical regions in a balanced manner and to give priority to the most vulnerable and most affected countries by the phenomenon of drought. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Togo.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the Secretariat for the report on droughts. This is a matter of concern for my country, Togo. And it is for that reason that we have already drafted the National Drought Plan. And as the delegate from Uganda, who spoke on behalf of the African group, I would like to reiterate our gratitude to the global mechanism for all the support that they have provided to our country in assisting us to plan our drought program. Togo is facing numerous challenges and environmental issues. Most of them are due to demographic growth, poverty, and the mismatch between the use of natural resources and their renewal. And the most visible environmental issues relate to the deterioration of forests and of land in various forms. And so as to improve our readiness level for possible droughts, Togo has expressed its interest to join the Drought Initiative, which provides technical and financial assistance to state parties that would be interested in drafting a drought plan. And also, the overall goal that Togo has in joining this initiative is to draft its national drought plan so as to endow the country with useful tools, both legal and institutional, so as to better face the vicissitudes of the climate to ensure that the country can withstand possible droughts. Chair, we must consider 3 key pillars in Togo so as to effectively tackle droughts. These are, first, to create drought surveillance systems and drought early warning systems, to assess the vulnerability and risks related to drought. Third and last, to implement measures so as to limit the impacts that drought might have and to better address drought once it has happened. And so the implementation of the drought plan developed in our country is a matter of concern. And we are also looking for sources of financing so as to finance actions that are already underway. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Togo, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to associate myself by what has been expressed by the countries to which we are members, especially the Arab group, that drought is the most important phenomenon in our areas. Hence, we have to address it and address the resulting effects thereof in accordance to the geographical region. The Arab Center on Droughts Studies, which has been nominated by the UNCCD as the main center for the implementation of draft policies, to be a point of reference in terms of the studies on drought, because it has all the necessary resources and has conducted all the necessary studies in this field. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I would like to extend my thanks to the Secretariat for the report prepared on drought and the importance it has given, considering that our Convention is primarily on the certification and land degradation. Lebanon, such as other countries in the region, also suffers from climate change, which has been of extreme importance to our country. Hence, we need to have the relevant policies in order to combat it efficiently. We support the interventions by the Arab and African groups, as well as what His Excellency, the representative of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Syrian Arab Republic, especially regarding the Arab Center AXA, in order to effectively fight this phenomenon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of Lebanon, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Drought is a very compelling problem in Sri Lanka. So the Sri Lanka welcome the report prepared by the Secretariat on Drought. We support it in full. This report brings about multifaceted guidance in facing droughts. Sri Lanka is also facing the ill effects of climate change and resultant effects of drought. Sri Lanka is also engaged in drawing a comprehensive drought mitigation plan for the country. Sri Lanka also initiated many irrigation projects to provide water for drought affected areas and envisage on much required program on upper watershed management programs with the help of the World Bank and the Green Climate Fund. Sri Lanka is also welcome best practices, technology transfer, and technical and financial support from various donor agencies for our fight against drought and land degradation. Thank you very much, Chairman, sir. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues. This issue of drought is so important. I mean, you can really get a sense of that by the sheer number of interventions around the hall here. And we're really glad to see all the good work that's come from the Drought Initiative. We think this is really tremendously promising. For us, we've had extended droughts in various parts of our country over many years, and we do a lot of work at home on this to try and help the farmers, the ranchers, the local communities that really bear the brunt of the impact on this. The drought, honestly, is part of the reason why you've heard in a number of our interventions that we're very keen to remember that the reason we're here is DLDD and not just LDN. That last D in DLDD is really important, and we do want to be sure that this is getting due attention in our work. For us, the collaboration about drought, sharing of experiences, and partnering will be really important to maintain the mobility and to be able to move quickly and in an agile manner. For many countries already in a drought crisis, really there's no time to waste. I mean, we're hearing that this morning. For us, we really see value in early warning systems, in risk mitigation practices, and we believe that they can really have impressive cross benefits and be a really good way to leverage resources really effectively to maintain the best benefits that we can. Avoiding and preparing, we can try and keep even more countries from joining this growing, very large number of countries experiencing drought crises. We consider this work on drought to be an excellent way forward for implementation of the UNCCD in order for it to have a really meaningful impact on the ground for our convention, where the impact really means the most. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As this is the first time my delegation is taking the floor, let me first express my thanks and appreciation to the government and people of India for the welcome and hospitality received at this COP14. Mr. Chairman, Marshall Islands is the only Pacific country so far to receive support for preparation of National Drought Plan of Action. As a low-lying atoll country where water is scarce and is being impacted by climate variability, the protection of our coastal aquifers and maintenance of our rainwater harvesting systems is critical to our survival and well-being. Over the past 10 years, my country has made several drought state of emergency, with the latest being in 2017. Mr. Chairman, while we are grateful for this support, we have concerns with the way in which the process proceeded, and we have expressed this to the Secretariat. It is important the knowledge of the Pacific Islands is taken into account when drafting national action plans to ensure plans are locally appropriate, sustainable, and hope that these considerations will be taken into account for future work of the Drought Initiative, and that the Secretariat with the Marshall Islands and Pacific Island neighbors and other small island developing states. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands, and I give the floor now to the distinguished representative of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me the floor. The delegation of Guyana expresses its thanks and appreciation to the Secretariat for the documents which are before us this morning on the item relating to the thematic issue of drought, and particularly in relation to the drought initiative. Mr. Chairman, the Guyana delegation shares the sentiments of many of the preceding delegations on quite a number of the important aspects of this issue. Allow me to underscore three aspects in particular. First of all, the clear and strong interlinkages with other aspects of our work, and I think that has emerged very much in the course of the interventions this morning. Secondly, the need for integration, particularly in terms of the planning frameworks. And thirdly, Mr. Chairman, I wish to underscore an aspect on which we have been speaking at length in this COP and previously, and that is really the need for capacity building, even as we pursue this initiative. And I say this on account of the experience of Guyana to date. Guyana has had some particular challenges in relation to drought, and therefore we responded to the call by the Secretariat for the Development of National Drought Plans. And there were several disparate elements in place, including some elements of an early warning system and various collaborative undertakings with a range of bilateral partners, including our neighbor Brazil, in responding to some of, on an emergency basis, to some of the challenges we face. However, in the course of developing the National Drought Plan, we saw that there was indeed merit in doing so, as it would allow us to embrace a holistic approach to the issue. But in the course of doing so, we encountered several challenges, particularly in relation to accessing the requisite expertise to develop the national plan. Therefore, as we consider this issue, we'd want to stress the need for increased and direct support to countries, and particularly assistance in building the requisite capacity to allow us to be as effective as possible in developing this plan and as really achieving our objectives in this area. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nigeria.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and distinguished colleagues. Nigeria would like to congratulate the Indian government for hosting the COP14 and the UNCCD Secretariat for coordinating the conference. Nigeria has developed its drought national plan and looks forward to its implementation. Nigeria welcomes the position of the African Group on drought indicators and the process of a legal binding instrument on drought issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nigeria, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Botswana.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to appreciate the drought report by the Secretariat and wish to request that subsequent to the development of the toolbox and the drought plans, emphasis should now be on the implementation of the plans and the use of the toolbox, and also provide the means to implement the plans. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Botswana, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Gambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks and profound appreciation to the government and people of the Republic of India for the hospitality extended to us since our arrival. Mr. Chair, the Gambia is among the countries in the Sahelian zone experiencing the impacts of drought since the mid-90s to date. The Global Mechanism and the UNCCD Secretariat supported the country in the development of the National Action Plan, the Land Degradation Neutrality Target Setting, and the National Drought Plan, and more recently, the development of a concept note on the 3S initiative. Mr. Chair, we would appreciate support from the Secretariat and donor agencies towards the implementation of the drought plan especially, and as well as the transformative plans and then programs, which are very important in the areas of food security and livelihood improvement. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Gambia and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Sudan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Sudan.
Apologies, Chair. I take the floor as South Africa. I think I pressed the wrong mic. We would like to appreciate the work of the Secretariat and the Global Mechanism on Drought, especially following the adoption of the Drought Initiative in the previous COP. We would like to align ourselves with the position of the African region as articulated by Uganda and supported by many other African states. We agree with many delegates that drought is one of the biggest catastrophes of our time. And the recent drought that hit the African continent recently left millions of African people destitute, with an estimated 36 million people across the continent facing hunger and starvation. And we believe that these drought events are expected to even be more frequent and more severe if one looks at the fact that they are anticipated to be exacerbated by the impacts of climate change. I think whilst we support and appreciate all the support that has been provided by the Secretariat, the Global Mechanism, and other funding institutions across the world, we also believe that we need a complementary, legally binding instrument that will complement the convention text that we have. So, Chair, we support the sentiments expressed by Uganda that we need that legally binding instrument. And I think the time is now. We are willing to look at a process that could then take us in future to such a legally binding instrument that will galvanize support across the world, because I think that the national interventions on their own are not enough for such a global catastrophe. I thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Grenada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning. And Grenada is also grateful to the UNCCD Secretariat and the Global Mechanism for the support it received as one of the few small island developing states to have prepared a national drought management plan. This management plan establishes an effective operating procedure for managing water demand for public supply and agriculture in the state of Grenada. And also it evaluated its supply options before, during, and after a drought-related water shortage. Now, as precipitation is the only source of water supply for the island, it is extremely important that Grenada has a plan in place, because a lack of rain in any season reduces the amount of available water that is for both public use, agriculture, and other sectors of the economy. And this plan, which will be adopted by the government as the official plan for the management of drought, was timely because it came in the middle of us experiencing a drought. So the public support and the participation of all sectors of the society was extremely important, and it had a resounding support from the entire population. So we believe that the plan is also a model that could be used for other islands in the Caribbean and other small island developing states. And Grenada is ready to share that information with whoever requests it, so that they too could have a model to build upon. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Grenada, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya aligns herself with the African position on droughts deliberation. And further, Kenya also appreciates the droughts report by the Secretariat and looks forward to a deep dive agenda on its implementation going forward. Kenya experiences severe cycles of droughts over the years, and hence a legally binding instrument on this matter is key. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Adding to the comments of my colleague, I am happy to share that India has already adopted an indicator-based drought assessment protocol. The indicators are similar to those defined in the WMO Handbook of Drought Indicators, such as meteorological remote sensing, soil moisture, dry spell, humidity, hydrological and crop zone parameters. Irrigation has proved to be most effective drought-proofing mechanism, bringing about stability in agriculture production. Measures such as promotion of micro-irrigation, renovation and restoration of water bodies have increased the water use efficiency at farm level. To address the issue of irrigation, the Government of India has launched a scheme, Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, for providing end-to-end solutions of irrigation supply, such as water resource distribution network and farm-level applications. I would further like to mention that while formulating the policies and framework for drought and desertification, parties may focus on safeguarding the interests of farmers, particularly the small and marginal farmers. Parties may identify potential financial instruments for drought and desertification. Thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of India, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Republic of India and the people of India for their kind hospitality in hosting this conference. Australia thanks the Secretariat for presenting this report. Drought is a real challenge for Australia. It's a recurring feature of our landscape. It has a significant impact on agricultural output, productivity, and farming income. I'd like to echo the comments made by my Argentinian and American colleagues and many other delegates who have spoken on this issue. We see drought as one of the core elements of the Convention. Australian drought policy is focused on encouraging self-reliance, preparedness, and risk management, and we're very pleased to see these approaches reflected in the Drought Initiative. We look forward to further collaboration and sharing of experiences on drought. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for affording us the opportunity to speak. Zimbabwe would like to thank India for hosting this COP14 event, and since this is our first time to speak, let me thank them profoundly for affording us a hospitable environment. Zimbabwe would like to thank the Global Mechanism for affording funds to carry out our desk study on drought. This desk study outlined the guidelines to develop the National Drought Plan, of which resources are required for us to come up with that drought plan. Zimbabwe therefore aligns itself with the statement by the Africa Group. In that, we also want to emphasize that Zimbabwe has experienced successive droughts in the last couple of years, and definitely this calls for the development of a drought plan. Zimbabwe therefore supports the need for a binding instrument on drought to enhance the full implementation of the convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe. Distinguished delegates, we have two more country parties, and then we have an IGO and civil society. I crave your indulgence to wrap up after these interventions so that we can proceed with the other matters to be discussed. The distinguished representative of Namibia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Namibia would like to align itself with the comments and interventions made by the African Group, in particularly focusing on the issues of drought in terms of having a legal binding instrument. Mr. Chairman, we would like to bring to the attention of this convention that amongst all other things with related to land degradation neutrality, drought has been a key issue and still remains a key issue to this convention. Drought is one of the core elements and it is affecting us severely. Namibia has been declared a state of emergency in 2016 and again declared as a state of emergency of drought this year. It is therefore of paramount importance that this convention start looking at a process, a leading legal binding instrument that would steer our focus into the issues that relate particularly to matters of food security. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Namibia. Distinguished delegate, I just would like to advise that given the time schedule, we will have to close the list. We will entertain the names that I had called earlier. So I give the floor now to the distinguished delegate of the Philippines, and then one IGO and civil society, and we take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, while the Philippines is located in the humid tropics, the country is also not spared from drought, and it is usually associated with the occurrence of El Nino, which is becoming more frequent nowadays. Mr. Chair, we appreciate the efforts of the UNCCD Secretariat and the Global Mechanism for supporting parties in the development of National Drought Plan, of which the Philippines is one of the recipients. While we recognize that this is a plan and a blueprint of what parties intend to achieve to address the slow and creeping impact of drought, we share the concern of other parties that this plan should be translated into action on the ground so that it will be truly beneficial to affected population. Therefore, financing mechanism to implement the plan should be explored with the help of the UNCCD Secretariat and Global Mechanism. We also believe that there are parties which have been successful in implementing their national drought plan, and therefore cooperation and sharing of technical knowledge and experiences must be pursued, particularly at the sub-regional and regional levels. In this regard, we would like to see a drought champion institution in the region that could assist parties in this respect. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the final country party for its intervention, the distinguished delegate from the Philippines, the 30th country party to intervene. Unfortunately, we will not be able to entertain the specialized agencies that have indicated an interest to speak. We encourage those who still need to speak to use the contact group for that purpose. But I now give the floor, as I indicated, to the IGO from the African Union, then the Arab Center for the Studies of Arid Zones and Drylands, and then to civil society, the Center for Environmental Justice from Sri Lanka. Thank you. African Union has the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. We want to thank you for the manner in which you are managing the session this morning. First, African Union, briefly, we want to thank the government of India for hosting this COP14. But I don't have much to say after hearing from a lot of our member states. But nonetheless, we want to thank the UNCCD for the drought initiative. And then we want to inform this COP that the African continent is in the process of developing a continent-wide drought framework that is going to be aligned with the UNCCD drought initiative. And then the idea is to provide support and assist our member states in dealing with the drought. As you know, drought is indeed a big problem in Africa, and therefore we want to support, and then we also call and first of all thank the donors and our partners for the support so far, but we believe this is not the end of the road. We still appeal to partners, UNCCD Secretariat and other collaborators to still assist our member states. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of the African Union, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Arab Center for the Studies of Arid Zones and Drylands.
Shukran, Sayyid Rais.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all. ACSAD is the Arab Center for Studies of Arid Lands and Arid Areas. It's an institution which falls within the framework of the Arab League. It's a center which works to promote the sound management of these lands throughout the Arab world. Given the importance of the impact of drought, our center has adopted a methodology, a monitoring methodology, which enables us to gauge drought. We use remote sensing, satellite remote sensing, more specifically, drought impacting agriculture, and we study its impact on agricultural production overall. This is something which is active throughout the Arab states at both national and international levels. Studies have been published in a great many scientific journals, and a great many of them fall within the framework of the IPCC and our convention. We would like to convey gratitude to Lebanon, Syria, and others, and we are gratified to see this methodology being taken up by them. And all parties, especially those in the Arab world, use it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Arab Center for the Studies of Arid Zone and Drylands. And I now give the floor to the civil society representative from the Center of Environmental Justice from Sri Lanka.
Good morning, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, colleagues. My name is Hemanta Vitanage, Executive Director of the Center for Environmental Justice based in Sri Lanka. I represent the civil society organizations gathered here. Even with modern science and technology available, the local communities are still struggling with growing incidents of droughts, mostly attributed to the climate change. In the past 20 years, nearly 300,000 farmers have committed suicide, according to the India's National Crime Record Bureau. A considerable number of these suicides can be attributed to the droughts. Even some research suggests that droughts in one of the main causes for suicides in Australia. In Sri Lanka, at least 700,000 people have been affected in the last couple of years due to the droughts, but there is no data about their movements. There is no segregated data in many other places. Yet the drought is one of the main causes for economic losses, social unrest, rural evasion, with subsequent pressure on urban poverty. Criminal acts finally taking their own lives. Climate migration is already happening in our countries. Are these numbers not enough to open our eyes? The civil society organizations we represent have diverse models of fighting land degradation, restoring lands and growing trees, and converting deserts to forest. They deserve more attention and more voice in fighting back the desertification. I hope this is not the case yet. We see that some still believe more in market mechanisms than people's initiative, despite their limited role in combating desertification and protecting people. Mr. President, we must believe in people on the ground. There are enough scientists, policymakers, practitioners in this room and all over the world. It will build the right nexus. I attended one of the side events organized by the International Water Management Institute and others who enlightened the attempts to provide information including rainfall forecasting in Asia and Africa for making drought-related decisions. There are adequate tools being developed for mitigation, preparedness, and response, including vulnerability assessment, monitoring, and early warning. Unfortunately, very little such knowledge has used for national policymaking and warning farmers to overcome drought-related crop failures. It may be due to the lack of dialogue between the scientists, policymakers, and the practitioners. It is evident that the communities cannot anymore depend on the traditional weather forecasting since the rapid change in the weather due to climate change. They need more support from the scientists and practitioners. Drought management is not necessarily water management only. It will require finding traditional seeds, changing crops, and even rethinking cropping patterns. As we see in every country, you may not need expensive infrastructure development to deal with this issue if they use the right information and dialogue among the right people. There is no one-size-fits-all solutions to this problem. We may not have a complete resilient mechanism due to the unpredictable climate scenarios. However, if the policymakers can use the latest research findings available in the International Water Management Institute, World Meteorology Organization, and many other institutions, it can save local communities, make climate resilient food production, restoring our lands. I believe UNCCD is the platform for national governments to convert such critical knowledge into policy and practice. Mr. President, by its decision, COP13 invited parties to use as appropriate the drought-resilient adaptations and management policy framework in order to strengthen their capacity to enhance drought preparedness and resilience. Mr. President, now we have to put this into practice. Combating desertification is only possible with the real action on the ground. On behalf of the CSOs, I invite all the parties, financial partners, CSOs, and private sector to act faster and act on the ground. I thank you.
I thank the representative of civil society, the Center for Environmental Justice of Sri Lanka, our final speaker on this issue for this morning. And I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat, Mr. Daniel Segai, to respond to the questions and comments from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are very much encouraged by all the good comments, and thank you all for your interventions. I cannot go through all these comments. It's very long, but I just want to take note of some which have been mentioned, like the need for a toolbox capacity building. It's already in our plans, depending on resource availability. We have plans to do all. We already recognize the need, and there were also a number of mentions on the options. Policy options, financing instruments, legal instruments. These have already been detailed in the report, and I believe this will be also discussed during the cow contact group. And the need for a gender also mainstreaming. We already have a gender action plan, so this is already being taken care of. And there were a number of important mentions also about the need for a South-South cooperation, especially from China, Grenada, and also India and Philippines. So this is also very important because countries can learn from each other, and the need for the implementation of the national drought plans. So all points are well taken, and we have already noted them, and thank you very much for your intervention.
Distinguished delegates, I now turn to the second issue this morning, sand and dust storms, and I now invite the committee. In fact, the committee has before it a document entitled Follow-up on Policy Frameworks and Thematic Issues, Sand and Dust Storms, note by the Secretariat, ICCD/COP14/17. I now give the floor to the representative of UNCCD Secretariat, Mr. Kang, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, by Decision 31/COP13, parties requested the Secretariat and appropriate UNCCD institutions and bodies to collaborate with other relevant United Nations entities and specialized organizations in the process of assisting parties in implementing the policy advocacy framework, in particular anthropogenic sand and dust storm source mitigation and strengthening resilience. The document ICCD/COP14/17 presents a summary of the activities undertaken by the Secretariat for the period from 2017 to 2019, as requested in the same decision. The document proposes recommendations on approaches and the priorities for future action to strengthen capacity and ongoing efforts in addressing the negative impact of sand and dust storms. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat, Mr. Yu-Chan Kang, for a statement. Are there any delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the report that was just introduced? I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkmenistan.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Turkmenistan welcomes the initiative of strengthening the Secretariat of the Convention on the Conventional Desertification, and we'd like to thank you for the documents you have prepared for our attention. For Turkmenistan, where over 80% of the territory is covered by the Karakum Desert, the problem of the fight against dust storms is of great importance. I'd also like to note that for states of Central Asia, especially for Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, the environmental situation which arose as a result of the drying up of the Aral Sea is having a very major impact. When strong winds start to blow, dust rises from the former bottom of the Aral Sea, the now exposed bottom of the Aral Sea, And of course, these dust storms strike us on a regular basis. For example, in 2018, we had a dust storm and sunstorm which hit the southern borders of Turkmenistan, and over days, dust particles hung over the capital, Ashgabat. A similar situation arose throughout Uzbekistan. Currently, in the near future, upon the initiative of the Secretariat, we plan to launch a project which will study the movement of sand and dust around the area. And we hope that the results of this study will be used to carry out large-scale projects to achieve all of our events fighting against dust and sand storms. And by way of conclusion, I would like to convey my gratitude to the government of India, as well as to its people, for the outstanding organization of our conference, and of course for the very warm welcome. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkmenistan, and I give the floor now to the representative of Algeria.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you so much, Chairman. As this is the first time that I take the floor, I'd like to convey my gratitude to both the Secretary and the Government of India for the outstanding preparation of this conference. I'd also like to convey my gratitude to the Secretariat for the document which they have prepared on the problem of sandstorms. I am speaking on behalf of the African Group, which has taken note with satisfaction of the progress achieved by the Secretariat in terms of managing the problem of sandstorms, something which we consider to be both a cause and consequence of the degradation of soils and lands. Now, if we want to reduce the degradation of lands, we will have to tackle the underlying causes. The Secretariat, by incorporating the United Nations Coalition for the Fight for Combating Sandstorms, have started to set up, or lay down rather, the first piece of the puzzle. The framework which was elaborated will enable us to outline our strategies and actions against sandstorms. We have in our hands a compendium of information and recommendations concerning the assessment and management of sandstorm-related risks. Ladies and gentlemen, satellite photography demonstrates that sandstorms, of course, know no borders, and they threaten all states at environmental, economic, and social levels. For this reason, we ask the Secretariat and the Global Mechanism to find and mobilize the necessary financial resources for joint initiatives to tackle sandstorms, this through new resources and mechanisms, and to facilitate access to these aforementioned resources, and incorporating sandstorms as an initiative within the framework of the Umbrella Program, and to plan for further capacity building for states requiring such workshops. Chairman, I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Argentina would like to underscore the efforts made by the Secretariat, which have been included in this document. Efforts that include the global map on sand and dust storms. All the while, we would like to underscore the following observations of the technical unit on dust and sandstorms. First, the significant economic impact that these storms can have. Mostly, the effects are negative, as this has been mentioned by others already today. However, it does have other positive and environmentally crucial consequences, such as the well-known phenomenon of the Amazon forest fertilization by phosphorus and the nutrients coming from the Sahara Desert. Additionally, a general distinction is drawn between sand and dust storms generated from natural causes and those caused by man-made activities. Now, this might lead us to think about the methodological complexity when assessing the phenomenon and measuring its impact. We would also like to point to the fact that the impact this has on people's lives vary for men and women. By this I mean that they are not gender neutral, and this is explained in the report. Which is why Argentina notes the two main ideas that we want to convey. First, the need to adopt, as is now usual when we're considering environmental matters, to adopt, as I said, a regional approach when addressing the problem. In this case, it would be a regional approach from the source areas of dust storms and the areas where the storms are deposited. This could be within one same country or starting in one country and being deposited in another. Additionally, the mitigation measures for sand and dust storms are usually mutually reinforcing, and by and large they tend to be similar to other ones that we could implement so as to avoid the degradation of land, so as to reduce drought vulnerability, to increase agricultural productivity, to guarantee the coverage of forests, and to increase the carbon production of soil, as well as to prevent air erosion and to guarantee sustainable use of resources. Which is why I would like to ask that the resources of the Secretariat and the member states and the specific donors concentrate on this type of activity. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Argentina, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. Regarding sand and dust storms, the EU acknowledges the importance of the issue and the potential risk this phenomenon poses on the economy, the provision and preservation of essential ecosystem services, and the impact on people's health, as well as on global and regional climate. We therefore encourage the UNCCD to continue providing policy and coordination support on SDS source mitigation through sustainable land management, addressing desertification, land degradation, as well as impact management. The EU welcomes in this sense the active engagement of the UNCCD in the UN coalition against SDS. We particularly appreciate current cooperation with UNEP and WMO on the global source-based map, and we would like to endorse continued collaboration in the future. We welcome as well the development of and encourage the use of the Sand and Dust Storms Compendium. Both the base map and the compendium are science-based, clear, and allow informed decision-making processes. We consider to be essential that these tools are made available to interested parties and widely disseminated, together with the meteorological data. Ladies and gentlemen, cooperation with other specialized UN agencies should continue in view of the cross-cutting and multidimensional nature of the topic, to produce an updated knowledge base on SDS and support capacity building in those countries experiencing serious disruptions due to SDS. Where applicable, synergies should be sought with the implementation of the Sendai framework, national adaptation plans, national strategies for sustainable development, nationally determined contributions in the framework of the Paris Agreement, and others. Given the many existing framework and initiatives, the EU believes that we should be very careful with the creation of new mechanisms, such as the Secretariat's proposal to establish a new thematic program network. Where weaknesses to current coordination mechanisms are identified, these should be further worked out before engaging in the creation of such a network. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sand and dust storm is a common issue faced by countries in the desertification area, and SDS have serious impact on the ecological, economic development and people's livelihood. It is the common enemy of all mankind. SDS is not a national issue. No country or region is immune to SDS and its impact. We should and must conduct effective international cooperation by joining hands and make joint efforts to combat SDS and mitigate its impacts and damages. China would like to make 3 comments in this regard. First, we should strengthen SDS mitigation from its source. Under the coordination of the UNCCD Secretariat, we should establish international and regional coordination mechanism. Whether it is money, strength, experience, or technology, every country should contribute to combating SDS from its source by taking preventive measures. Second, efforts should be made to establish transboundary and cross-regional SDS early warning and emergency response mechanism. Through institutional arrangements, we should build partnerships among affected countries, and we should strengthen monitoring technologies, exchange, and information sharing. And we should jointly establish the standards for the SDS intensity standards and also transboundary SDS notification system. Third, we should strengthen information sharing and experience sharing. Relevant countries should communicate, exchange information regarding experiences in combating SDS from its source and taking effective measures. We should strengthen our input, and we should conduct comprehensive ecological governance approaches covering mountains, water, forest, field, lakes, grassland, and sand. And when resources are available, large-scale restoration and mitigation projects would be a very good approach. For example, the Beijing-Tianjin Sandstorm Source Control Project can be taken as a very good example with an annual input of more than $2 billion USD per year, and after 20 years of governance, we have also effectively mitigated SDS. The occurrence of sandstorm in Beijing has reduced from 17 times per year in the 70s and 80s in the last century to only twice of blowing sand and airborne dust occurrence in 2019. And in the northern part of China, the impact zone and also the intensity of SDS has also been weakened. It has normally happened in late spring, and also compared with the same period of 2001 to 2018, the intensity and impact has also been weakened by a large margin. China is a main donor of the SDS source mapping project and will strengthen support and also strengthen South-South cooperation to mitigate its impact. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from China, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since this is the first time that we are taking the floor, I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to the government and people of India for the warm welcome and the outstanding generosity. In the same vein, we also would like to thank the Secretariat for all the efforts that they have made to prepare this document on on sand and dust storms. I think this phenomena is extremely dangerous in Sudan and in the neighboring Arab countries. There is dire impact on the economy and on socially, economically, and demographically, actually. So we rely on the support of the states parties to address this phenomenon. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sudan and now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India appreciates the decision wherein the Secretariat agreed to form the coalition to combat sand and dust storms in response to United Nations General Assembly resolution. This document on sand dust storms summarizes the activities undertaken by the Secretariat to strengthen capacity and the ongoing efforts in addressing the negative impacts of sand and dust storms for the period from 2017 to 2019, and also provides guidance on approaches and priorities for future action. India is delighted to learn about UNCCD's initiatives towards combating sand and dust storms, such as to collaborate with the Desertification, Land Degradation and Drought Northeast Asia Network, UNIP, World Meteorological Organization and other specialized agencies to organize capacity building and technical workshops and training sessions for the affected country parties. India promotes and supports UNCCD's approach of addressing sand and dust storms using the compendium, which informs and guides on assessing and addressing the risk posed by sand and dust storms. The Government of India may take up studies to measure the economic impact of sand and dust storms and developing forecast and early warning system in collaboration with Indian Meteorological Department, Space Application Center, Indian Space Research Organization. India has already issued a guideline on preparation of action plan, prevention and management of thunderstorm and lightning, squall, dust, hailstorm and strong winds, aiming to facilitate and improve the capacity of the states for preparing action plans and effectively to mitigate the adverse effects of these incidents. It will help develop measures for the assessment, forecast, preparedness and mitigation through coordinated efforts with multiple agencies and undertake reconstruction as an opportunity to build disaster resilient infrastructure. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I thank the distinguished representative of India, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support what was spelled out by the delegate of Algeria. We know that this phenomenon is a cross-border phenomenon in our region. Syria has suffered and is suffering from this phenomenon. The effect and the impact of this phenomenon has increased over the last decade, leading to a negative impact on the local communities, agriculture, transport, and health. An example is the dust storm that struck the country in 2015. It lasted for 8 days, and it struck many other countries, Egypt, Cyprus, and other countries. The storm claimed many lives and caused dire economic damages. So this phenomenon should be dealt with under the convention. We should adopt the projects and programs to address this challenge. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the Syrian Arab Republic, and I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. At first, I would like to wholeheartedly thank the Secretariat for preparing this document on this phenomenon and placing this item on the agenda. We also express our support to the statement by Algeria. These storms have a negative impact not only on one country, but on a number of countries. So this negative impact can have economic, environmental, and social effects. China has a successful experience in stabilizing dunes and reducing the effect of storms. So I think we need to avail ourselves of this experience. Egypt has a collaboration and cooperation agreement with a Chinese regional authority that the interpreter did not catch. There is also cooperation, strong cooperation, between the Desert Research Center in Egypt and the Arab Center for Studies in the Arid Center, ACSAD, as well as the Mednin Center in Tunisia. This cooperation has led to drawing a map of the sand dunes in the Arab region. Dunes is a main source for storms that has an impact on sustainable development. So we call on the Secretariat to adopt an initiative on sand and dust storms. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt. Distinguished delegates, I just would like to remind us all that we still have 2 more items to deal with before the end of this morning's session, which should conclude at 1 p.m. So I'm kindly asking if you could be very brief in your interventions going forward to allow for as many country parties, but at the same time for us to conclude us on time. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Saudi Arabia.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the resolution concluded in COP13 and the relevant document by the Secretariat on the activities carried out in order to implement the said resolution. Mr. Chairman, the Arab region, especially in Western Asia and North Africa, is one of the most regions in the world affected by sand and dust storms. They have an effect, a transboundary effect that could reach the levels of a sub-regional, regional, and inter-regional level. Hence, we need the cooperation on all levels and the cooperation of specialized international agencies to put forward a viewpoint on the sources, the tendencies, the movement of such storms and how to address their effects and put an end to them on all levels, national, regional, international. The conference should find an integrated method to put an end to the effects of such a phenomenon economically, socially, and environmentally. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As this is the first time we address this conference, I would like to start by extending my thanks and appreciation for the government and the people of India for the gracious hospitality and for hosting COP14. And we'd also like to thank the executive director for his efforts. We appreciate the efforts exerted in preparing this report on sand and dust storms. Kuwait is situated in the arid and semi-arid area in the Arab Peninsula. It's affected by storms that amount to over 100 days per year, which has its severe effects and economic losses. Such storms is a mutual common interest. It's not the a national issue, but rather a regional one. We look forward to enhancing an initiative under an international umbrella on capacity building and training in order to mitigate and improve the means of confronting such a phenomenon. We would like to thank the countries that have spoken, especially Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kuwait, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tajikistan.
Господин председатель.
Chairman, thank you so much for this opportunity afforded us to take the floor. We too are taking the floor for the first time, and I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers, to the Indian government, and of course the people of India for the outstanding organization of our work. And of course, we would like to thank the Secretariat for all of the work that you have carried out. I would like to back my colleague from Turkmenistan and would like to state that although Tajikistan, of course, lies far away from deserts, sand and dust storms reach us as well. And this leads to the degradation of the ice caps on our mountains. The glaciers on our mountains, which of course feed the whole of Central Asia and its rivers with water. And this, of course, has a very negative impact on the environmental situation in our republic. And of course, what we have is degradation of soils and degradation of land, more generally speaking. This phenomenon also has a very negative impact on the environmental situation in our republic. So this is all I wanted to say. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tajikistan, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are various climates and landscapes, namely deserts in Iran, mostly located in south, east, and central parts. We have valuable traditional knowledge to cope with, and furthermore, more than 6 decades of broad work in desert land through restoration and stabilization of sand dunes hotspots. Totally, more than 2.5 million hectares of plantation projects has been carried out in Iranian wind erosion hotspots to protect our infrastructures in this area, which includes 115,000 hectares of restoration and plantation and mulch spraying in last 2 years. However, hotspots are growing around the country as a result of development and construction of infrastructures in arid lands, shortage of fresh water, and climate change, and drying of wetlands in southern half of the country, which needs a more inclusive approach. We have also broad cooperation and interaction with interested countries, in particular China, and many delegations of African and Asian parties have visited our projects financed by Iranian government, and we welcome such a kind of cooperation and visits. At the end, we welcome a regional initiative with Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and the other interested parties, especially regional parties, and would like to thank the Secretariat for its efforts about STS management. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Distinguished delegates, I will entertain 5 more country parties, beginning with Lebanon, followed by Iraq, Japan, Guyana, and Uzbekistan. And then we have 2 IGOs and 1 civil society. I crave your indulgence, distinguished delegates. The floor is now given to the distinguished delegate from Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, we would like to extend our thanks to the Secretariat for the document prepared on sand and dust storms. And we associate ourselves with the statements of China, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Algeria. There is a dire need to implement projects nationally, sub-regionally, and regionally in order to combat this phenomenon. Hence, we have to earmark financial resources, and the global mechanism has to help the affected countries to provide the necessary funding. There is also a need to benefit from the experiences and the sound practices carried out by some countries and to transfer them to the countries affected by such storms. The fact that there are some international organizations in our countries, for example, UNEP in Western Asia, does a lot of efforts in order to help us counter this phenomenon. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lebanon, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the Secretariat for all the immense support given in preparing a document on sand and dust storms, and I associate myself with what has been said by colleagues that sand and dust storms is an important issue. It's one of the most important environmental phenomena faced by the whole world in general, the Arab region in particular, and Iraq especially. In Iraq, there are about 300 days of dust storms, which has adversely affected food security and the productivity of land, not to mention the grave economic losses endured by our country as a result of such storms. As Iraq is a country full of the dust storms due to the lack of the plant vegetation and migration. As you know, Mr. Chairman, this problem is the transboundary one. It does not need a passport or a visa. Hence, we welcome the program on fighting sand and dust storms, and we hope that there would be an initiative under a global umbrella to mitigate and adapt, and I support other parties in this respect, especially Kuwait, Algeria, Egypt, Lebanon, China, and Saudi Arabia. And I hope that there would be a national and sub-regional cooperation in order to carry out a joint project. And I'm asking the Secretariat to finalize the recommendations on this respect and to provide assistance to the affected countries. And I hope at the end of this COP that we would have a resolution by the Secretariat to provide technological and financial support. And I agree with what has been said by Egypt to benefit from the Chinese experiences and the experiences of the Arab Center for the Study of Arid Zones and Dry Lands, as they have much experience in this field, and to ask the general mechanism to provide us with the necessary support and to benefit from success stories and to exchange experiences between countries affected by this transboundary problem. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Because this is the first time for Japan to take the floor, so very quickly I'd like to just explain our great appreciation to the warm hospitality of the people and the government of India, and the great effort of the Secretariat. So Japan shares the concerns and the negative impact of the sandstorm. But at the same time, I'd like to point out the fact that we cannot find the words sand and dust storm in this convention text. That means sand and dust storm itself is out of the scope of the convention. Accordingly, what the convention can treat is to tackling, to create an environment to prevent the outbreak of sand and dust storm. In this sense, we support the EU, and this text, the para 34A, the establishment of a mechanism such as a thematic program network on SDS. This text we'd like to modify. For example, encourage conducting thematic program on SDS, and from the viewpoint of the budget situation of the current secretariat, we should put on a voluntary basis at the end of this para 34A. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Guyana delegation has taken note of the documentation before us, and we reaffirm our support for the efforts of UN entities and the specialized organizations in contributing to efforts to achieve our objectives in this area. For the Caribbean, to optimize resources and capacity, we rely substantively on the work of the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, and we commend its work. For Guyana, we stress 2 points. First, the importance of stronger efforts to produce mitigation at the source of sandstorms, and secondly, the need for strengthened data collation to improve early warning systems and to have enhanced knowledge of the impacts of sand and dust storms on the marine environment, particularly coral reefs. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guyana, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, giving to me floor. First of all, I want to thank to Indian government for its hospitality. Uzbekistan appreciates for preparing this document. We support Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. Sand and dust storms become global problem, and Uzbekistan also facing serious problem with sand and dust storms. To combat sand and dust storms, Uzbekistan developed real activities. According to the special resolution of the President of Uzbekistan, this year we planted in the dried bottom of Aral Sea about 500,000 hectares and targeted another 500,000 hectares by 2020 and started plantation in the region border to Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. I would like to thank to the Secretariat for supporting this document. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the final country party, distinguished representative of Uzbekistan, and I now give the floor to the IGO, beginning with Arab Center for the Studies of Arid Zones and Drylands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to extend my thanks to the Secretariat for its interest in this matter. Sand and dust storms are one of the result of soil erosion by wind. which is one of the forms of desertification and land degradation. It is the most common in the Arab area. Hence, our center, ACSAD, has been interested in combating such storms from their source, and it has accumulated wide experience in this field after having developed a number of relevant projects to stabilize the sand dunes in Arab countries in cooperation with the national relevant authorities, and has been keen to raise the awareness and to apply the participatory approach in this respect. Once again, we would like to avail our services and expertise in the service of our colleagues in the Arab region, and we call upon the establishment of a regional alliance in order to address the issue of sand and dust storms in our region in cooperation with the United Nations, UNEP, the Western Asia Office, and other competent authorities in our region. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of the Arab Center for the Studies of Arid Zones and Drylands, and I now give the floor to the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development.
In the name of God Almighty, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor. On behalf of the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development, under the auspices of the League of Arab States, which is in charge of agriculture and food security, I would like to extend my thanks to you and to the Secretariat for the enormous efforts exerted in organizing such a gathering. Mr. Chairman, our organization sees that sand and dust storms is an enormously important issue on the regional and international level, as it has an adverse effect on agriculture, infrastructure, and human health, as well as the economy at large. The Middle East and North Africa, according to our sources, lose yearly $13 million of its income as a result of sand and dust storms. Such storms affect the quality of air as well, and according to the reports of the competent authorities, there are millions of people who die every year as a result of such storms. Hence, we believe in our organization that concerted efforts have to be exerted in order to put an end to such phenomenon, to know its causes and try to control them. This necessitates capacity building in cooperation with all competent authorities. Our organization sees that cooperation between competent international authorities is an indispensable means to put an end to this harmful phenomenon by organizing gatherings with specialists to exchange experiences in order to put an end to sand and dust storms, and to have common approaches and to assess the effects of such storms and how to control their paths and the populations affected by them. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I would like to stress that our organization associates itself with the interventions by Arab member states in North Africa and Western Asia. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Arab Organization for Agriculture Development, and I now give the floor to civil society group China Green Foundation.
Thank you, Chair. As we know, airborne dust presents serious risks for human health, especially to children. A global model assessment in 2014 estimated that exposure to dust particles caused about 400,000 premature deaths. In many locations, drought generates dry soil and creates sandstorms, with growing number of tornadoes and strong winds due to climate change. This is a major problem in many parts of the world, affecting mostly children, women, and people with disabilities. This also increased the health costs for the poor families, which are already unaffordable for many low-income families. Restoring land is an urgent need to tackle this issue. However, many countries have not prepared for this. No actions taken to educate people on the ground. The national government and experts should work hand in hand with the civil society organizations who have more involvement on the ground level to develop early preparedness and early warning mechanism and disaster management plans, including building necessary health facilities of those possibilities of the possible locations. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Civil Society China Green Foundation, and this being our final intervention on this matter, before I give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat to respond to the questions and comments from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate comments and interventions from the parties. I'm convinced to take note of all the questions, suggestions, and comments. And my observation is quite clear and straightforward. And hearing from your interventions that stressing the cooperation and collaborations among different entities, different actors, partners at all levels. I hope that I could provide more information during over the next days when we get together for discussion. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, representative of the Secretariat. Ladies and distinguished delegates, I now invite the committee to turn its attention to the issue of gender. The committee has before it a document entitled Follow-up on Policy Frameworks and Thematic Issues, Gender, ICCD/COP/18. And I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat, Ms. Corina Voigt, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By document ICCD/COP14/18, parties have been presented with a summary of the efforts of the Secretariat and the GM and their partners to support countries in rolling out the Gender Action Plan as requested in Decision 30/COP13. The same document also contains information on the consultation of the effectiveness of the Gender Action Plan and outlines recommendation to further improve the action plan and its implementation that parties may wish to take in that regard. Thank you.
I thank the representative of UNCCD Secretariat for our statement. Are there any parties, delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the reports that were just introduced? I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. On gender equality, we acknowledge the efforts that the Secretariat has taken so far to promote the mainstreaming of gender equality in strengthening the capacity of stakeholders to implement the Convention. In particular, the completion of the first Gender Action Plan is worth noting as an important step in promoting the gender-responsive and transformative implementation of the Convention. We would like to emphasize that the parties will be able to achieve the gender equality goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda only when all women and girls, including women and girls with disabilities, are fully included in its implementation, including the Agenda Item 15.3 on achieving the Land Declaration Neutral World. Ladies and gentlemen, the implementation of Gender Action Plan and gender mainstreaming do, however, require more concrete and systematic actions and measures by parties, the Secretariat, and the global mechanisms, and other UNCCD institutions and bodies, including SPI and the stakeholders. We strongly support further improvements of the Gender Action Plan and the review of the UNCCD reporting process in this regard. The development of gender and age disaggregated indicators, including a specific section for parties to report on progress made in the implementation of the Gender Action Plan, is therefore necessary. The inclusion of gender sensitivity in all learning, training and capacity building implemented by the Secretariat and multiple partners is indispensable. This will promote the necessary attitude change and address practices and stereotypes that undermine right, leadership and participation of all women and girls in decision making and all processes related to the implementation of UNCCD. The full engagement of men and boys as agents and beneficiaries of change is of utmost importance in promoting the rights of women and girls. We could not underline more the importance to review and enact legislation and undertake reforms to realize equal rights to access, use, own and have control over land, property and productive assets and resources, including inheritance rights, strengthening land tenure and ensuring women's legal capacity and equal rights to conclude contracts and access financial services. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the European Union, and I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India welcomes the decision and encourages mainstreaming gender equality and empowerment of women into the desertification, land degradation and drought-related policies and activities. In India, we have separate Ministry of Women and Child Development, which is the nodal agency for coordination of gender budgeting activities, including preparation of strategic framework of activities that is then disseminated across various ministries and departments. India emphasizes upon the importance of gender as a cross-cutting theme across several development policies and programs, and it is feasible to identify budget components and budget shares that are more closely associated with specific gender aims to bridge inequalities in India. Mr. Chair, I would like to mention a successful example in India of gender budgeting, which is from energy infrastructure sector, that is the Ujjwala Yojana, which has shown the immense impact on the health and social status of women living below poverty line by providing them cooking gas connections, which is a part of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, a scheme of Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas for providing LPG connections. India appreciates the UN Women efforts in partnership with the IUCN and UNCCD towards developing the manual to support the integration of gender equality in LDN project development and welcomes its launch at COP14. India agrees to UNCCD's Gender Action Plan, which is a good starting point for actions to mainstream gender into LDN TSP and LDN TPP, and integration of Gender Action Plan indicators in the UNCCD reporting. India being a country party to the 3 Rio Conventions, such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and also the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, which recognizes the importance of taking gender into account in order to effectively address the challenge of achieving land degradation neutrality and promote sustainable development. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I thank the distinguished representative of India, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Gender Action Plan is a good starting point for the mainstreaming of gender issues in the work of the Convention and its implementation. We all know that to achieve gender equality, big gaps exist, and these gaps has to be filled on all levels and in all sectors of society. Mainly in the primary sector, big deficiencies in this regard exist, and all parties have to scale up their efforts to create an equal level playing field. We would like to endorse the statement of the European and its member state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Wanted to express our gratitude for this document and to say that the environmental policy in Argentina is aligned with the rest of our public policy, in which for social, historical, political reasons, gender policy has a pride of place. Which is why the National Action Plan for Argentina refers to the importance of taking into account the gender agenda when designing and when implementing measures to combat desertification, land degradation, and the mitigation of droughts. Argentina would like to recall the priority spot that drought had in the CRIC 17 held in Guyana, where it was one of the three main thematic topics for the region. And Argentina would like to point out that the text of the convention has the gender agenda in Article 5D and SF 19.1a and 19.3e. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Argentina, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa is taking the floor on behalf of the Africa Group on the item of gender. In terms of the global challenges that we are faced with, gender continues to be one of the world's strongest makers for inequality. Such inequalities span all sectors, leading to men and women being faced with different levels of vulnerability to the DLDD and climate change impacts. The most affected, bearing the most burden, are women in rural areas who live below the poverty line with limited resources for ensuring sustainable livelihoods. The adoption at COP13 at the UNCCD Gender Action Plan was a watershed moment for the Convention. The Gender Action Plan enables our blueprint for the Convention, which is the 2018-2030 strategic framework, to be gender responsive as it contributes to improving the living populations affected by dissertation and community resilience to drought. The Africa Group commends the work of the Secretariat on Gender, and we'd like to reiterate that parties should ensure that gender, youth, and vulnerable groups are involved in the development and implementation of policies and regulations at national and local levels, such as the land degradation neutrality transformative projects and programs, national drought plans, sand and dust storms, migration, and national action plans. The role of women has become more profound. Thus, we need to make gender issues visible on the agenda of social dialogue institutions. The International Labour Organization reaffirms that without respect, there is no dignity in the world of work. Therefore, land ownership becomes an imperative as it provides the dignity women long and deserve. We need to look to the future with a human-centered lens, thereby enabling women, children, and vulnerable groups to benefit from a future that will empower them, not further destroy lives and leave them in abject poverty. We would therefore like to invoke the provisions of Article 17 of the UNCCD on research and development, urging parties to develop and strengthen sub-regional and national research, especially in developing countries, in order to improve the living standards of people in affected areas. Notwithstanding, parties should develop legislation and policies that improves the lives of women, children, and vulnerable groups. We reiterate the importance of capacity building, and thus urge parties to conduct extensive awareness-raising campaigns targeting women and vulnerable groups as outlined in Article 19 of the Convention on Capacity Building, Education and Public Awareness. I thank you, Chairperson.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa. And this being, it seems, the final intervention from country party, I move now to representative of civil society, the International Forestry Studies Association.
Hey. Sie provide.
Do we have the representative of the International Forestry Studies Association?
Good morning, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, friends. My name is Kajal Arora from India, representing International Forestry Students Association as a part of the CSOs to attend this COP. Mr. President, as we know, women's rights to use, access, and control land is crucial for the livelihoods, income generation, and health and sanitation of women and their families. Land is an important asset in women's resilience and empowerment, and as such, they should be considered active partners in decision-making processes over land-related issues. We cannot assure gender justice without giving due recognition to the role they play on the ground in protecting natural resources and territories. Among the farmers around the world, women constitute majority of farmers without right to land. Women are heavily affected by the global land grab increasing tremendously in the agriculture and infrastructure in the recent times for many corporations and for infrastructure building. Women's right to sustainably use and control land is very much affected. Women in many countries still don't have access to land. In some countries, most lands are still held by the government. We are sure women can play a very strong role in fighting desertification and land degradation. The importance of gender is well addressed in the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests, that is VGGT, which are the most progressive guidelines and supported by the 192 UN member states. Therefore, we propose that this COP to recognize gender justice as paramount in fighting land degradation and desertification. We also propose to ensure a gender-responsive consultation and participation process in case of land-related projects. We guarantee timely and correct information flows regarding changes affecting women's land tenure. We try to stimulate gender-responsive design and implementation processes of land governance policies and laws, and to invest in knowledge and expertise regarding gender equality and women's land rights. I thank you.
I thank the representative of civil society, the International Forestry Students Association, and I now give the floor to the representative, final intervention, and the representative from the Food and Agricultural Organization from specialized agencies. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As is the first time the Food and Agriculture Organization addressed this session, we'd like to thank the government of India for hosting UNCCD COP14. FAO welcomes the UNCCD Gender Action Plan as an important tool for achieving effective responses and solutions for natural resource management and improving the living conditions of affected populations, recognizing that rural women and girls in particular are major agents of change. FAO contributes to reducing gender inequalities in many ways and has developed several relevant tools and methodologies for that purpose. FAO supports governments to design and implement policies and programs that ensure women and men have equal access to productive resources, organizations, technologies, markets, decent employment and social protection, and that they participate and benefit equally from agricultural services and opportunities, including fisheries and forestry. Jointly with governments, development agencies, academia, civil society, and the private sector, key international instruments such as the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests in the context of national food security are being applied, providing a paramount opportunity for reversing gender inequalities. In addition, to strengthen local capacities across ministries and other national institutions, the organization works with countries to produce and use sex disaggregated data, gender-sensitive indicators, and socioeconomic and gender analysis, all of which are critical to evidence-based policy development, as well as for land degradation neutrality targets and reporting. Through programs to accelerate progress towards the economic empowerment of rural women, FAO works with partners such as the IFAD, WFP, and UN Women to empower rural women through capacity development and the creation of conducive policy environments, increasing women's incomes and enhancing their decision-making power, including on land-related issues. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative of the Food and Agricultural Organization, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat to respond to the questions and comments from the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all your comments and support for the gender issue in the UNCCD. And it's definitely reaching gender equality and implementing the UNCCD Convention in a gender-responsive way takes time and is an old stakeholder issue. This is well noted. Also, be well aware that capacity building, awareness raising is most needed. And I think we could further discuss in the discussion groups, contact groups on that. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat for our comments. Ladies and distinguished delegates, we have just about 14 minutes remaining of the time allotted for this session. And we still have two issues to deal with: migration and new land tenure. Migration and land tenure. I would like your permission for us to extend this morning session by 15 minutes to allow for us to commence the discussion on migration and to take as many comments before the 15 minutes is up at 1:15. Is there any objection to us having an additional 15 minutes? I hear none, so we proceed, and we shall consider the issue of migration now. The committee has before it a note by the Secretariat, the positive role that measures taken under the Convention can play to address desertification, land degradation, and drought as one of the drivers that causes migration. The in particular referred to here is the ICCD/COP/19. I now give the floor to the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat, Ms. Barbara Bendani, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. In the document ICCD/COP14/19, parties have been presented with a summary of the progress made by the Secretariat in addressing desertification, land degradation, and drought as one of the drivers of migration, as requested in Decision 19 COP13. The document summarizes the progress on the support given to parties in the biennium, the study on the positive role that measures taken under the Convention can play to address desertification, land degradation, and drought as one of the drivers that causes migration, the support provided to regional and international cooperation and initiative, and the cross-sectorial cooperation promoted with United Nations agencies and programs, regional and international organizations, and stakeholders. Based on the lesson learned from the work done since COP 13, document ICCD/COP14/19 contains proposed language for consideration of parties with regard to future work priorities to address desertification, land degradation, and drought as one of the drivers of migration. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the UNCCD Secretariat for her statement. Are there any delegations wishing to make a statement in connection with the reports that were just introduced? I give the floor to the representative of the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU welcomes the work conducted by the UNCCD Secretariat on addressing desertification, land degradation and drought as one of the drivers that causes migration. We would like to encourage the Secretariat to continue on working on addressing these interlinkages in partnership with relevant organizations. Implementation of the Convention through measures to promote land restoration and sustainable land management and to address drought can deliver multiple environmental, social and economic benefits that can have positive impacts on addressing migratory challenges in and from affected countries. We would have expected the Secretariat to come up with more concrete suggestions for follow-up actions and priorities for action on this important topic, in particular for strengthening relations with other international organizations such as IOM and facilitating political coherence and coordination between parties. The EU supports and has provided financial resources for the work of the task force of the 3S initiative for sustainability, stability and security in Africa. During its first year, the action has been effectively contributing to the African countries working together on the links between environmental degradation, desertification and stability, and migration and security. The high-level political involvement of some member countries has given good visibility to 3S challenges and contributed to the recognition of links between land degradation, drought and migration in the major international policy processes of migration, including in the wider UN context. The EU would like to acknowledge the Secretariat's role in this initiative and is looking forward towards more research on the potential for land-based green jobs as well as national roadmaps to achieve the targets. Ladies and gentlemen, there is need, however, for a refined approach, with particular attention to economic viability, realistic targets, possible financing mechanisms, replicability, sustainability, and a strengthened political leadership of the initiative, including from regional organizations such as the African Union, in order for the initiative to prove its sustainability and added value. A well-documented and clear conceptual framework integrating clearly the sustainability, security and stability dimension is key in this regard. We would therefore like to encourage the Convention to strengthen the collection and dissemination of knowledge on the links between DLDD and migration and promote better use of the existing data in formulating policies and activities to tackle insecurity and forced displacement, address their root causes and increase resilience before considering the replication of this initiative to other regions. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you so much, Chairman. As this is the first time that Morocco takes the floor, I would like to, at the outset, convey my gratitude in the most heartfelt way to the government of India for all the efforts made in organizing this Conference of the Parties. And I'd like to seize this same opportunity to thank and congratulate the Secretariat for the outstanding quality of the work carried out. Chairman, it is Morocco's honor to take the floor on behalf of the African Group. Now, the African Group welcomes the document which was just presented to us regarding the positive role played by measures undertaken in implementing the convention, in combating desertification, the degradation of lands and drought, and their impact on migration. In this respect, the African Group praises the efforts undertaken by the Secretariat in assisting a number of states, including within the framework of the operationalization of the 3S initiatives: sustainability, stability, and security, and this through support for the development of the project on degraded lands aimed at creating new jobs and, as a result, stabilizing populations in the places they live. Despite all this, there is a need to note that despite all of the praiseworthy efforts undertaken in the field of the preservation of lands, states on the African continent have repeatedly stated their commitment here and remain very vigilant regarding signs of further mobilizations at both regional and international levels. Chairman, with less and less productive lands in a context where the African continent is dependent on natural resources, which after all provide over 80% of employment, and over the next 15 years it is estimated that close to 200 million young Africans out of the 375 million young people who will enter the working world live in rural areas. Well, as a result of this, the African Group is concerned by economic opportunities which are slowly disappearing in rural areas. We also refer to the provisions of the Global Pact for Migration, including a second objective regarding minimizing and mitigating the factors of migration, recognizing that the lack of jobs and income-generating activities linked to land degradation is one of the causes which forces rural youth to leave their homes. And we urge states to strengthen their fight against climate change and soil degradation to, at the source, tackle the problems of migratory flows, especially in vulnerable regions. Chairman, convinced as we are that the restoration of works would stem migration from Africa and could strengthen the resilience of lands to develop value-added chains, and recalling Provision 19 of COP13, asking the Secretary to promote appropriate actions to fight against desertification, the African Group would recommend to the 14th COP and its Secretariat the following: to promote the restoration of degraded lands, to create employment opportunities inter alia for women and youth, to stabilize the population, back the elaboration and implementation of national strategies on migration linked to desertification, promote renewable energies as a productive factor for goods and services and the conservation of natural resources for the stabilization of rural communities, back the development of SMEs in rural areas by creating value-added chains for local produce, and inciting or promoting investment in the private sector, and emulate the 3S projects throughout Africa to create employment for vulnerable groups in rural areas, and strengthen international cooperation to mobilize the technical capacities and financial resources which are needed for the operationalization of national strategies. I thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India appreciates the report, which is to address desertification, land degradation and drought as one of the drivers that cause migration. Mr. Chairman, this report is very, very important as it gives the idea about how to strengthen cross-sectoral cooperation with other UN agencies and support regional and international cooperation with the positive initiative. Mr. Chair, India appreciates and agrees to the decision 28 taken in COP13 with regard to positive role that measures taken under the convention which can play to address desertification, land degradation and drought as one of the drivers that cause migration. The study commenced by the International Organization of Migration depicted a complex interrelationship between migration and DLDD and the positive contribution of land rehabilitation, restoration and sustainable land management on migration. Mr. Chair, India, an agriculture-based country, is totally in agreement made in the note to the by the Secretariat India also support the various initiatives taken under this report. The Pradhan Mantri Krishi Vikas Yojana is a very good example in India. Is the initiative which is aiding on the stop migration as well as facilitating the farmers to increase the productivity of land. The 3S initiative of sustainability, stability and security by UNCCD is already in many of the schemes of the government of India. There are many schemes developed by the government of India to stop the migration, and this is very, very important subject nowadays, because nowadays our whole world is going to the in moderation conditions, and peoples are leaving the villages from one place to and going forwarding to the cities. Therefore, this is very important aspect, and all the country party to take care on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of India, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guyana would like to recognize the report and commend the convention for taking this initiative, as it puts squarely into focus the link between climate change and desertification that is caused by saltwater intrusion to low-lying coastlines, particularly where those coastlines have the most productive lands. In this case, capacity building, economic viability, knowledge sharing, and in particular cooperation with the relevant agencies to build the profiles and data required to inform our government, civil society, and private sector of the type of activities that would be required to move populations to higher ground is welcome. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Thank you, 主席先生。将荒漠化与生态移民问题联系在一起，是一个有利于
Desertification and environmental migration is increasingly enjoying the attention of the international community, and it is a very effective tool to generate the resources necessary for the implementation of the convention. On this point, we would like to touch on the two following points. Firstly, we would like to reiterate the position which we voiced during the second and third session of the Bureau of COP13, to wit, environmental migration, which China organized, has lightened the pressure on the environment and improved the living conditions of the population struck by DLDD, I apologize. The forced displacement as a result of the environment is quite different. We suggest that we should draw a distinction between the two in our report, and to underline the forced aspect of environmental migration in our report. Secondly, the key here is to ensure development which would give pride of place to the environment and to focus on development itself and human development. We have to preserve the right to life, the right to development, but at the same time also ensure green development that is sustainable and which would provide for an improvement of the living conditions of the population. And it needs to be sustainable, of course. Now, standard practice in China has shown that what is key is cooperation between the government and civil society, as well as local enterprises. I'll give you an example. 80% of the village of Turkukala is desertified. The environment is so vulnerable that the village was about to become deserted as a result of desertification. Now, under the aegis of the government, the Ili Group and other local enterprises built a village for pastoralists, which was spread over millions of hectares, where pastoralists are organized to promote green tourism, which is environmentally friendly. They have all become employees and tourist operators. This initiative, of this approach, was successful in providing immigrants sedentary employment, profitable employment, better education, and better living conditions. This type of initiative, including that which we have practiced in Kupuchi, was crowned with success. And this is the Chinese experience for the implementation of the 2030 agenda.
I thank the distinguished representative of China. Distinguished delegates, we have 3 more country parties. 4 I recognize, 4: Egypt, Tunisia, Japan, and Sudan. And then we have to wrap up this morning. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this report and for the 3S initiatives. We know that the whole question is quite intricate and is contingent on a number of factors, a number of conventions, the Framework Convention on the Climate Change, on drought and desertification. There are many factors that would lead to migration, and I would like to express our support to what is contained in the Secretariat reports, because the adoption of Sustainable Development Agenda 2013 would provide the opportunity to create jobs and to provide enabling environment to check migration, whether local or international. This could be done by better exploitation of natural resources. We would like, therefore, to welcome the report that was presented by the brotherly delegate of Morocco. This will help Africa achieve stability. I think this is the overall goal of our efforts. It is important to raise awareness and to adopt a program thereon by the Secretariat, especially in the countries that are prone to migration. Well, Egypt has made a strenuous effort to check migration by providing job opportunities for the youth in various areas such as agriculture, industry, and tourism, among other things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Shukran. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tunisia considers that migration, land degradation, and lack of or dwindling productivity is one of the most important topics in North Africa. There is a relation between dwindling resources and income in the rural countries and migration, whether local or international or cross-border migration. Therefore, we express our support for the African statement read out by Morocco. Tunisia is one of the most affected countries by this phenomena because we are a transit country and we are the gate for the northern Mediterranean area. Tunisia has suffered from this phenomenon at two levels. We call on the international community to place extreme emphasis on this question by mainstreaming or by coordinating efforts between the countries of the international community, and to link this phenomenon with other phenomena such as desertification and climate change, especially in arid and semi-arid areas, in order to stabilize local populations and provide income opportunities. By doing this, we will probably hold migration in check, whether locally or across borders. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Tunisia, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the Secretariat for this document. Sudan thinks that there is an intrinsic link between migration and, on the one hand, desertification and land degradation in Sudan, in the world. Sudan has been adversely affected by that because land degradation, drought has had an impact on migration. This has also dwindled job opportunities and led to the dwindling of natural resources. So I think we should place emphasis on finding a solution to this problem. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sudan, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Japan would like to make just a very small correction. In the para 29, the C, there's a relationship between the renewable energy with migration. So this para 29C, the evaluating how to integrate and build a synergy with work on access to renewable energy such as solar and wind energy. This is not related to this migration problem, so we like to change this. We like to delete this access to renewable energy such as solar and wind energy. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan, and I now give the floor to the final speaker on this issue and for this session of our meeting, to civil society, the International Forestry Students Association, and I ask if you could be very brief so that we can accommodate the responses in the time that we have left.
Good morning, Mr. President, distinguished delegates and friends. My name is Ayushi Yadav from India, representing International Forestry Students Association, a part of CSOs attending the COP. People living in degraded lands are very vulnerable to climate-induced migration. According to the UNCCD, land degradation may force up to 700 million people to migrate by 2050. But this is not yet part of the documents in this COP. To reflect this, we propose to use the word forced migration and displacement in agenda documents. We propose the migration linked to the climate incidents, droughts, and desertifications should be recognized. Once the productivity of the land is lost, they are forced to migrate in search of food security and livelihood and become internally displaced people. We request all the parties to make plans to reduce climate migration, to identify measures to reduce land degradation and desertification, to identify the vulnerable people and develop a helping mechanism in national, regional, and local levels. I thank you.
I thank the representative of civil society, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat to respond to questions and comments from the floor.
I would like to thank you for your encouragement and for all the support. We have taken note of your concern and on your suggestions, especially on green jobs. on the cross-sectoral cooperation, as well as, of course, on the suggestion on the text. We have also taken note of the lesson learned from the experiences of some parties, and we will work to integrate all these comments, and we look forward to further discussion.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, we have run out of time. The committee will resume its consideration of Agenda Item 3C to consider the issue of land tenure tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in this very room. The meeting is now adjourned.